So my research actually began as a child. I was a child, I had a persistent cough. Every time I exercised, I would cough. Every time I went home at night after exercising, I would cough for hours. And then sometimes if I just laughed, I would cough. Now, until I was an adult, and until I was married actually, and my husband said, somebody's not supposed to cough this much, I didn't realize what I had. And actually, you can probably tell that that last bit of breath I took was actually constricted. So as an adult in college, I realized I had asthma. And so I study asthma, and particularly I study early initiators of asthma. So what beyond our DNA leads us to develop asthma? And so one of the things that I study is actually environmental health issues. And the environmental health issue that I look at is combustion-derived particulate matter, or PM. Combustion-derived particulate matter can come from a variety of sources. It can come from mobile sources, such as diesel exhaust or vehicular exhaust. Stationary sources like power plants, factories, even fireplaces. Or natural sources, forest fires or volcanoes. However, what we tend to forget is it also comes from cigarette smoke, and what we probably don't know is that it also comes from e-cigarette smoke. So there are particulates generated in that e-cigarette smoke. And I've actually had friends who tried to switch from regular cigarettes to e-cigarettes, and they developed this persistent cough from smoking the e-cigarettes, like they were addicted to the e-cigarette. You know, I don't know if you've seen somebody switch from a regular cigarette to an e-cigarette, but they can't let go of it. It's like constant. So we look at particulate matter, and particulate matter by the EPA is actually not defined based on chemical components. It's actually defined based on size, which seems like a very bad indicator, but that's what it's defined by. So this is actually a representation of a human hair. And so we have particulate matter that's called PM10. We have particulate matter that's called PM2.5, particulate matter that's PM1, and particulate matter that's not even on here called PM0.1 or nanoparticles. PM10 is about 10 microns in diameter, and if you look at a single strand of hair, it's about 100 microns in diameter. So we're looking at very, very small particles. Now the health effects coming from this particulate matter are actually coming from particulate matter that's 2.5 to 1 micron or an even less in size. And the problem with these is actually, because they're so small, we inhale them and they go to the lower airways. And because they go to the lower airways, if they're really small, they can actually translocate from the lower airways into the bloodstream and cause health effects in a variety of organs, from the lungs to the liver, to the heart, to the brain. And so that's some of the stuff that we study. Particulate matter has always been a problem, but there are several environmental disasters, as they're called, that actually led to regulatory standards for particulate matter. So these historical problems are shown here. In 1930, in the Meuse River Valley in Belgium, there was a 3-day episode of very high particulate matter that led to 6,000 illnesses and 63 deaths. In 1948, in Derived, Pennsylvania, there was a large amount of particulate matter developed from the industrial workings that were done there from October 26th to the 31st. 7,000 people became sick and 20 died. And the one that you might know of is the London killer fog. And this actually led to the regulatory compliance issues that we see today. In 1952, between December 4th and December 9th, a killer fog descended upon London. And in that killer fog, and during this time period, 4,000 people died. But over the next 3 months, another 12,000 people actually died. Now, to give you an idea of what that particulate matter looks like, this is a picture from Derived, Pennsylvania at noon on October 9th, 1948. And this is a picture from the London fog, and that's a police escorting a London bus with a torch at 10:30 in the morning. So the PM levels were so high, and these were based on climate changes that actually pushed the particulate matter down. But it led to these deaths, and it led to deaths that actually occurred over a longer period of time. And so regulatory agencies developed regulatory issues to limit the amount of PM that we release in industrialized countries. However, we still don't control the amount of PM that's emitted. And so this is a picture I took. I was in Tiananmen Square in China in August 2007. We're looking at the Imperial Palace here, and the bird's nest for the 2008 Winter Olympics was being built here. And so these are PM levels from August 2007, and remember the Summer Olympics occurred in August 2008. And so all those reports you were hearing about PM problems were due to what you're seeing here. And then about just over a year ago, I went to India. And these are pictures that I took in India, in Delhi, in November 2017. And so this is the amount of particulate matter that you're dealing with. And you get off the airplane in the airport, and you can't see through the airport because the haze and the particulate matter is that bad. So worldwide, we have a huge environmental PM problem. This is average PM, annual PM 2.5. So this is a really tiny PM. So if you're looking at a hair strand, it's about a 40th of the size of a hair strand. And so this is PM 2.5 across the globe. And you can see areas of very high PM, which are shown in red, and various areas of low PM, which are shown in blue. And what you can see is that there are areas where PM levels exceed international standards. And that exceedance of international standards is tremendous. It's about sixfold of the normal international WHO regulations. And if you count the number of children and living in these areas, it's about 2 billion children that are living in areas where PM levels exceed international standards. Now this is important because I'm particularly interested in children and what children and infants are exposed to and how it leads to airways disease. What we fail to sometimes think about is that this is not a region-specific problem. Okay, so we're looking at that map and we see PM 2.5 levels that are very high in India and China, and we say, well, that's not our problem. And that's an incorrect assumption. So this is a map of the United States, and this is from 2017, September 4th. And this is when the wildfires were burning in the northwest coast of the United States, so Montana, Idaho. And these are the wildfire areas, actually. And so this is PM levels measured across the United States during the time when those wildfires were burning. And so what you can see is that PM levels from these wildfires not only extended from the wildfires with very high levels, but extended all the way to the northeast coast. So combustion particulate matter is not necessarily just a regional problem, but it's a global problem. And you can see that actually they even took up on the Pacific streams and transferred all the way to Japan. And some of the things from Japan's meltdown of the nuclear factories were actually seen and observed on the west coast of the United States. So we have to think of this as we're all one planet, and this pollution is going to affect us all. But PM pollution is not just an outdoor problem. We tend to think of ourselves as when we go inside, it's a lot better for us. But actually, that's not the case. It's a little bit better in the United States, but in global areas, people still cook on open fires within the household. They cook here, they have their children sitting here in the area, and the particulate matter levels are extremely high. And in fact, there's something like 3 billion people around the world that still use these types of fires to cook on. Now we think that that's just a socioeconomic issue, but actually this also occurs in the United States. So this is a cooking process. We all cook in our homes. We probably fry in our homes, and each of these processes actually emit particulate matter in our homes. And we don't tend to think of it as a problem, but it actually is a big problem. In fact, particulate matter in your home is 10 times the level of it outside during cooking times within the home. Now, you don't see it because it's very small, but it's still there. And this is just an example sort of showing you some of the particulate matter being emitted from the oil that's being combusted on top of this open flame. Now, depending on how this is ventilated, it's not a problem, but we've all been in places that are poorly ventilated. In fact, in my house in Memphis, I can tell you if I cooked on my stove and turned the vent on, the vent blew into my face. And so sometimes the ventilation is the problem, sometimes the cooking inside is the problem. And I'm particularly interested in this because children are particularly vulnerable. They're vulnerable for a number of reasons. The biggest reason is they spend a lot of time outdoors, they run around, they inhale more pollutants than we do per body weight, and because their airways are much narrower. And so any type of injury to the airways actually further narrows those very small airways and leads to greater airways disease. So what are we talking about PM levels in the United States? So this is a PM levels actually averaged across the United States over a 4-year period. So the high levels are shown in red and the low levels are shown in blue. And you can see that there's a lot of PM 2.5 in this region of the United States. Now the EPA sets PM 2.5 annual limits at 12. You can see that we're exceeding those levels, right? Okay. Now, if you look at asthma prevalence in the United States in children, what I would like to point out is that the asthma prevalence rates are actually higher in that same region. The cardiac deaths in the United States are actually higher in that region. And diabetes prevalence are higher in that region. And this is showing the prevalence of diabetes in the United States and a map of the PM 2.5 levels during the same time period. So it's very powerful data. And then this is childhood obesity. And again, it's very high in these areas and in the West Coast, as you saw in the other maps. Now, what's really interesting about this data is, so we worked on this for a little bit, and we worked on this because I had a postdoc that was very observant. And that postdoc came to me and he said, I mean, honestly, we were walking down the hall, and he goes, Dr. Cormier, those animals are bigger. So the moms were being exposed and the offspring were bigger. And I said, okay, you're a PhD. What does bigger mean? Do they weigh more? Are they longer? Are they wider? What's the difference? So he went and he actually did a short study to try and figure out what this was, and then he actually showed me they were bigger. They weighed much more. So they were obese. But they were pups, right? So they're little, right? They're about this big, but they're like twice the size of a normal pup. So we contacted a person who was actually doing obesity research at the University of Tennessee, and he put them in these things called metabolic cages. And in these metabolic cages, you can actually measure how much they eat, how much they move, and try and figure out where the obesity is coming from. And so one of the things a very interesting thing that they found is that, number one, animals or offspring that are born to moms that are exposed to high levels of PM are bigger. And they're bigger not because they eat more and not because they exercise less. They're bigger because they're born to moms that are exposed to PM. And so this sort of indicates that the obesity rates that we're seeing globally are not actually due to infants or children that are eating more, but actually due to infants or children whose moms were exposed to particulate pollution. And so, as Dr. Beck mentioned, I'm director of the Superfund Research Center, and I have lots of Superfund Center people here tonight. Thank you. And in this Superfund Research Center, we actually study a particular thing. We study combustion-derived particulate matter. And so we study a particular component of that combustion-derived particulate matter. And that component is actually free radicals. So we study free radicals that are associated with PM. And you're probably asking, what the heck is a free radical, right? Typically in the body, we're composed of molecules, and those molecules actually have atoms. This is the hardest science I'm going to give tonight. So those atoms are typically composed of electrons. Typically, electrons like to exist as a pair, and free radicals are actually when electrons are unpaired. And they're not happy in an unpaired state, so they try to grab electrons from wherever they're going in the body, and that causes significant amounts of damage. It causes cell death, it causes tissue death, and it causes even DNA damage and problems to offspring. And so we study these free radicals that are associated with particulate matter. And part of the Superfund Center is to actually understand how these things are formed during combustion processes, how they elicit health impacts such as cardiovascular or pulmonary health impacts, and in particular, can we prevent the formation of these or destroy these radicals before they impact human health? And so while we study that, the biggest question you might have is actually how you can prevent long-term injury or even short-term injury from being exposed to particulate matter that contains these radicals. And there's a lot of things that you can do at the personal level. One, you can monitor PM 2.5 levels in your environment. That's usually on your weather app. You can limit your time outdoors or your duration outdoors or your exercise activity outdoors during times of high PM. You can improve your indoor environment. You can actually improve your stoves, get rid of the gas-burning stoves, which I love and I'm not going to get rid of, but I'm going to create a vent. I got a vent that now goes outside. You can burn cleaner fuels. So wood-burning fireplaces that aren't ducted out of the house actually tend to put a lot of particulates in the house. Wood-burning stoves put a lot of particulates in the house, so you can limit your exposure by changing out those heating devices. You can eliminate indoor smoking. That includes e-cigarettes and regular cigarettes. And you can keep children away from cooking areas, especially infants. Or you can filter the air and/or filter the air. And that there's a variety of house filtration components that are available. Or you can wear N95 mask when working outdoors, for example. And while these are uncomfortable, I actually used that when I was in India. And I'm the only one who actually went to a meeting by the WHO who came home without respiratory problems, because I wore this every day. And every day I changed it, and every day I looked at the new one. And next to it, one looks like it was dipped in oil, and the other one looked like it was brand new. The other thing you can do is actually pay attention to your diet. So we in South Louisiana actually eat a lot of diet that's actually very high in antioxidants. For example, the highest antioxidant thing in our diet is actually red beans. We all like red beans and rice on Monday. And then we like our fruits. We love our blueberries and blackberries. I actually map out the blackberries in the park as I take my dog for a walk. And then there's the strawberry festival in Ponchatoula that we all attend. And then there's pecans, which I don't know who doesn't like pecans, but I love pecans. So all of these are very high in antioxidants. And these antioxidants actually help by donating electrons to the free radicals and inhibiting their activity in the body. So those are some of the things we can do personally to prevent these exposures. We do a lot of other research in the lab, but the majority of the stuff I showed here is some of the stuff we do in the Superfund research program, where we study the health effects. We study the cardiovascular health effects, we study the diet-related health effects, and we study the pulmonary health effects associated with exposure to these particulate compounds. If you have anything you'd like to discuss with us, I put our website here, and then I put some flyers out front. I hope you've gathered some of them. And if you have any questions, I'll be happy to answer them. Thanks.